This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
The sound of praise for your Sunday morning.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Introducing Reverend A.R. Bernard of the Christian Cultural Center.
Was the son of a preacher man.
And Rabbi Joseph Potasnik of Religion on the Line.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Now, here's the Rev and the Rabbi, where faith matters.
Good morning, I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Rev, I understand there are 3 stages of life. Wanting stuff, accumulating stuff, and then discarding stuff. And when you look at life, isn't that true? We're young, we want all that stuff. We then accumulate that stuff, and then we say, got to get rid of that stuff.
You know what? I will tell you, if I'm just starting out without the stuff, I will say, well, let me get there. Let me experience it.
Yeah. So, Rev, this week on the Jewish calendar is the festival of Purim. Jews lived in the Persian area of the world, 4th century.
Persian Empire, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And here you have an evil Haman who sought to destroy the Jewish people. You know, now you could substitute the word Haman with Hamas. And we make noise. Whenever that name is recited, we make noise. And I always think that's a lesson. That is an important lesson, that in the face of evil, you can't be silent. And you and I, in our respective faith traditions and the histories of our respective peoples, we know that's to be true. John Lewis said, right, make good trouble. And, we can say, make good noise. Do something about it. Don't just complain about it.
You're right, Rabbi. We have a responsibility. I mean, you know how it is in New York suburbs. We don't know how it may be in other cities across the country, but definitely in New York, we have now the slogan, all right, see something, say something.
Yeah.
And that's not just for an unattended backpack. It's in life. I mean, if you see something that needs to be addressed within our society, we should lift our voices. That's critical.
Right.
That's how we hold each other accountable in a society.
And not only say something now, shout something, right? Because some people just whisper or they'll tell a neighbor, but they won't speak out loud. So if you want to talk about noise that was made, you watched the State of the Union message and you saw, I mean, I thought I was in some kind of, theater arena or theatrical arena. The behavior of some of the people, especially on the Democratic side, that's not how you react to it. You may not like some of the things that was said. You may feel the president was egging you on, but my God, coming in with paddles, and holding up messages or just sitting there,
Rabbi, I think that, number one, it shows that the Democratic Party is in crisis. They're not unified. Some were walking out, some stayed, some shouted out, some put up paddles. I think that, they're at a place where they really have to figure out, their strategy, what they're going to do. And, if I could throw some advice in their direction, I don't think it would work for them to try to mimic what the Republicans have done, or with Donald Trump. Republicans and under President Trump's leadership has become the party of grievance, but you can't become the griever as well, or, you have to come up with say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what we stand for. And these are the changes we want to make, and give a vision for the future, because that's what excites people. What are you going to do? What are you going to bring to the table?
It's amateurish. It's that babyish behavior. Come on. This is why you've been elected. spend your time fashioning arguments. Let people hear the difference, not just, mimicking, mocking. It goes nowhere. It's not a good commentary. My son called me afterwards. He says, "I can't believe what I saw."
What you just saw, yeah.
Yeah, and I said, Harrison, I can't believe, the place we are as a country. That we're better. Think back to the Kennedy-Nixon debates. Think back to that time when people really, went at each other with intellect, with with real, substantive information, not just with this kind of, this gimmickry or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, well, it's both sides, Rabbi.
Democrats absolutely.
I'd like to say, it's not one, it's the other. But I'm not going to join the finger pointing. I think on both sides. There's a wonderful passage in our New Testament, one of the Gospels.
Wait, when you say our New Testament, you mean your New Testament? Yeah, okay.
our New Testament.
Yeah.
We Christians, and Jesus is observing the fact that no matter what you say, you can't please the crowd. He talked about John the Baptist and how he was very austere and preached a message of change and strict obedience to the law. And then Jesus comes, opening his heart and hand towards the sinners and the marginalized within society. But they said they criticized John the Baptist and said he was wrong. They criticized Jesus and said he was wrong. And Jesus basically said, it doesn't matter what approach you take, they're going to be critics. And he judged them like children playing in the marketplace. And that's what came to mind as I watched. I said, man, these are grown-ups that are supposed to be our leaders. And they're like children playing in the marketplace.
We say
that's my 2 cents.
We have a saying in our tradition: a rabbi without critics is not a rabbi. You're gonna get it. That's true for Reverend. We have someone coming on with us today who really is such a knowledgeable individual that we're privileged to have, and I'm talking about Jonathan Wachtel, Global Affairs analyst and a former U.S. diplomat. We look forward to that conversation.
Yeah, so stay tuned for more of the dynamic duo, the Rev and the Rabbi, right here on Red Apple Audio Networks.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, we are privileged to have with us someone who has been with us in the past, and always we look forward to his return to our radio program. And now, Jonathan Wachtel. You should know that your remarks are going to be broadcast all around America. Jonathan is the Global Affairs analyst, former U.S. diplomat, senior policy advisor and director of communications at the United Nations. He worked with Ambassador Nikki Haley and her successor, Kelly Craft, and he is sought after by so many different news outlets. I've seen him doing interviews on all of these different programs. Each one is unique. But Jonathan, having been on all of those stations, you've now made it to the top. You're on the Rev and the Rabbi National.
I feel so privileged, gentlemen. So privileged. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, you helped make it possible. So
I couldn't have said it any better. Go ahead. Let's go.
So, Jonathan, I remember during the Reagan years and prior to that as well, the Soviet Union was always viewed as the evil empire. Has that vision changed? I mean, we're hearing about different kinds of relations with Putin, Moscow. Are we in a different place?
Historically, and you'll recall this, Reverend and Rabbi, we used to hear that the United States would be buried by the Soviet Union. That's what the premiers of the Communist Party used to say about us, including Khrushchev. So there's historically been an adversarial reaction to the United States, and it wasn't just passively looking at the United States. It was intended to undo us as a country, as a civilization, to make sure that the Soviet Union, communism, and let's be honest, Moscow ran the show It was the Russian Federation that was running the show, the Russian Empire, essentially reconstituted in the Soviet Union, that was out there to do us in, to destroy our way of life and to ensure that we were not the dominant superpower.
Things are changing, Jonathan, as you know, with this current administration, reminiscent of the 1920s when we took isolationist policy as a country and began to establish tariffs. There was immigration issues at the time. I mean, here we are reliving it in some ways, even though we've advanced technologically. But what are we creating in Europe with this policy that President Trump is exacting that's alienating our allies? Speak to that, please.
Yeah, so Europe has historically, since the end of World War II, looked at the United States as a savior, as a beacon of democracy, as a leading nation, a democratic nation, and relied on the United States as a partner to promote democracy around the world and shore up their interests coming out of World War II, which was such a devastating event in which over 50 million people were slaughtered. And rebuilding and looking at the United States with the Marshall Plan and everything that we put in that was extremely gracious, generous. The American people are looked upon as being a generous people. And there's been this, I don't want to say complete dependency on the United States or outsourcing of defense positions with the United States, but to a certain degree, an expectation that the United States is a big brother in the good sense of that, not in some sort of nasty way, but a partner there and someone who could be relied upon. Now we're looking at a situation in which the Europeans are being messaged that they have to stand up on their own 2 feet and really put together some sort of defense posture and have the ability to go on the offensive militarily independently of the United States. That's where we are today.
Do you think President Trump is right in saying that the relationship has not been equitable, that the United States has really been carrying much of the weight in these relationships?
Well, there is a lot of truth to that. In certainly, if you look at the numbers, so the United States defense spending is more than all of the European NATO countries' defense spending plus Canada combined. So we're clearly picking up the lion's share of expense when you do country to country comparisons, and it's pretty dramatic. I mean, it's a head above. Is it all of the European spending? Does European spending look completely paltry? No, but it's oftentimes hovering around 2%, and the United States just per capita spends more on defense. So certainly there's a justification to call for European countries to spend money. Why should the American taxpayer be picking up a tab when Europeans can do it perfectly well themselves in some spheres? Now, there's a cost to that, though, in terms of influence that the United States has and the ability to push our policy because money talks. So when you're spending a lot of money and there's that dependency, they're going to listen to you because, frankly speaking, you're paying a bill and they've got to listen to you unless they want to come out and ask their taxpayers to pay more money. So there's a give and take to this new frontier that we're finding ourselves in.
So let's talk about that meeting with President Zelensky, an infamous meeting now. Now, there were those who said it was the right way to go, to be very strong in demanding more from the president. And those say, no, that was not a good way to go. We don't treat our allies that way. How did you react when you saw it?
Here's the thing. We want, if we really care about the people in Russia and Ukraine and getting an outcome out of this hideous war that has been so senseless, so bloody, so costly, so tragic, just horrific. And we want an end to it. But we want an end to it that's going to create an environment in which there's going to be lasting peace and the opportunity for the peoples of these two nations that have, for the lack of a better way of putting it, slaughtered each other for the last 3 years, to try to have some sort of reconciliation. And if we end up in a scenario in which there's a settlement that is so egregiously imbalanced, it's going to be a recipe for fighting to erupt again, or it will be a recipe for certainly terrorism to erupt, or some sort of effort to try to exact pain on one party versus the other. So when you're in negotiations, and the Ukraine has, historically been an ally since the collapse of the Soviet Union, when you're airing your laundry publicly like that, or differences of opinion before all the eyes of the world, it makes it difficult in terms of the negotiations. And it also, let's face it, signaled to Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin that the United States has a big chasm in terms of differences of opinion into how to end the war and how the war has gone. So it's something certainly that the Kremlin would have appreciated seeing, but everybody in Ukraine and the European nations that are standing behind Ukraine and many countries around the world looked at this and scratch their heads. There's just no doubt.
Yeah. Where do we go from here? I mean, can we rebuild it? Can we ever regain confidence of allies? Or is this just a new time when people say, you know what, the relationship has changed somewhat, and we're going to have to contribute to the solution fiscally and however else is necessary? So
one thing is clear. Looking at that bizarre, I don't know how else to explain it, bizarre exchange at the White House. Certainly that was an impressive event and signaled many different things. But the basic truth is that was an event. Now we really have to focus on where this is going. So that train has left the station, and we are now heading in a direction that one would hope would create that type of balance, would create that type of outcome in ending this war that will promise not just immediate peace, but long-term healing and the ability to bring these two nations back together. I mean, the basic fact is these two nations, when you add them up, I mean, Russia's just so massive. It's so much bigger than the United States. It's just colossal in size. It's the biggest nation on earth. Ukraine is the second largest European nation. It falls under Russia. It's massive. It's bigger than France. It's bigger than Germany. So what's happened here is two territorial giants have been slugging it out. And it really matters how this is resolved, because the territories we're talking about, and Russia currently occupies about 20% of Ukraine, that 20% is larger than most European nations. So there's a lot at stake here, and a lot can go very wrong if this is not worked out in a way that will settle things and end up in a position in which this won't blow up again. The other thing that's going to be different is that Europeans will arm themselves better as a result of this. They will spend more on their defense budgets, and they're going to go into weapons production. There may be, certain situations in which U.S. weapons might not be necessary to them. We don't know where this is going. It's going to be a changed landscape, and certainly NATO will be affected by this as well.
Jonathan, what about leadership lessons? I mean, President Trump at one point in the conversation with Zelensky said, you don't have the cards. You don't hold the cards. Did Zelensky not understand who he was sitting down with and what the nature of the conversation would be like? Was he unprepared?
President Trump's right in terms of not holding the cards at the given moment in terms of where defense spending is, America's might in terms of ballistic missiles and anti-missile batteries and surveillance. There's no one like us now. The Europeans depend on us. They've essentially outsourced a lot of our military capability. And we see now that, the United States is not providing the intelligence. The Russians have been battering Ukrainian towns, and there's been loss of life. And it's clear that Ukraine is susceptible. And, it's just a basic truth. Now, my interpretation of this is that you have a battered president exhausted from this war, tremendous pressure, needs to get the funding, needs to have the military machinery to be able to push back at Russia, and is seen writing on the wall that has frightened him, and there's a certain level probably of desperation and frustration, and his composure was not helpful to his cause. So it's not a surprise that things got testy in that room. The unfortunate thing is it got testy in front of all of our eyes.
More of this interview with the Rev and the Rabbi coming up next. Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi.
Other nations are watching. I mean, they watched that exchange. They are now thinking about how they're going to interact with the United States, how they're going to interact with this president. Can you speak to that? I mean, if I were the head of state, and I'm watching, I'm saying, okay, let me rethink how I'm going to approach this president and the United States now. Can you speak to that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, 'cause surely the message is, we'll be your friend, but don't necessarily rely on us for spending to be your friend. We will say nice things to you and we'll support, but don't expect us to take you out to dinner every night, right? It's a different message. But things have changed in terms of perceptions of the United States even before President Trump took over. I mean, we look at the debacle of our withdrawal from Afghanistan and what that's about America's resolve and stick-to-itiveness, when it comes to conflict and our policy and what we're defending as a nation. And we've had situations in which the Kurds have felt slighted by decisions taken by U.S. presidents. We saw the way the Biden administration had issues with one of our closest allies, Israel, and where that left things. And now there's a reversal of posture now with Trump coming in. It's very complicated. It's got to be very confusing as a leader of a nation that is perceived as an ally of the United States and scratching your head and wondering, what is the United States about now? Are they really going to come to our rescue if we're in dire straits? Is the United States a reliable partner? The last thing we want is to have nations that are our allies and we're in good relations with begin drifting over to areas that have been, historically our enemy territory. And that could include Russia still. It certainly could include Beijing. And we have other concerns, too. I mean, there's this battle that we're talking about in terms of geopolitics, but there's an effort by nations to try to unseat the U.S. dollar as the common currency amongst BRICS nations. That is something that comes into question here. So there's, teutonic shifts that are underway here. And the implications of what's going on right now are going to have immediate and long-term effects on the United States and our ability to navigate through a very complicated world over the next years and decades.
Jonathan, let me ask you, going now to the Middle East, you mentioned Israel. For many, many years, we've been hearing the two-state solution. That's the only possible resolution of the conflict. Well, many have said, I have a colleague who wrote an article recently, that since October 7th, since we learned that babies were murdered with the bare hands of Hamas or other Palestinians who joined in, there can be no two-state solution. You can't live with someone who is seeking to destroy you. It makes it very clear that that is the plan. So what President Trump has done in terms of presenting other options is welcome to many who say, you know what, maybe this will get people to focus in a different direction and not the same old solution that hasn't produced any constructive results.
So, You're right in that you can't have a two-state solution if one of the parties, and in this case Hamas, has a charter that not just calls for the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of Jews, but actually indeed acts in that way. And that is their raison d'etre. That's them. That's what they are. They are not going to change their stripes. That's who they are. So they are an Islamist, political Islam, fascist organization, and they want to have Islam be the dominant force there. They believe in the caliphate. They just do not have any appetite whatsoever to have a state of Israel next door. It is completely anathema to everything they believe in. So there is no way that there can be two states with that type of leadership in the Gaza Strip, and that type of leadership that quite easily, without trying to break it down, to try to fight against it, could take over the area called the West Bank, where currently the Palestinian Authority is led by Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the authority, who's been in that position for so many years, and there haven't been free and open elections for so long that it's actually ridiculous. So there is no peace partner for the Israelis. So to be talking about a two-state solution is pretty ridiculous at this stage. The Palestinians really need to get leadership in there that is moderate, accepting of a two-state solution. Otherwise, you can't have that solution.
Jonathan Wachtel, it is no wonder people seek you out for your insights. Global affairs analyst, former U.S. diplomat. We have been privileged to be with you for the last 20 minutes, and we hope to hear more of you in the future.
The privilege is mine, gentlemen. Have a great time.
Thank you, Jonathan. Always a pleasure to have you on the program. And stay tuned for more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on Red Apple Audio Networks.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi. Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard. Great conversation. I just wish we had more time with him. He's just so knowledgeable of so many areas and articulate in how he expresses himself in response to these questions. So,
and he inspires thinking. That's what I like about him. He'll make, a point, and you begin to think about it and say, well, let's follow up with a question, as you did. I think these are new times. We can't just look at it through the old lens. Things have changed, and relationships change. In this case, our allies, I think, are going to see America in a different light, not just as writing a check, handing out money. But, what are we contributing to this? They have to ask themselves.
And look, President Trump, in spite of how we feel about his antics and, the way he applies change, because he's back and forth with it. One day tariffs, and then he says no tariffs for another month, and then tariffs back and forth. But there is truth to the fact that our government has enlarged so much, and we need to take a look at how efficient our systems and structures are. The New Deal, if you know the history, Rabbi, actually the government hired 15 million employees as part of the New Deal. And that's because so many people were unemployed coming out of the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
And, when the government shifted and became a major employer, it had to be fed. That machine had to be fed. And so as we take a look at, I don't necessarily agree with, an unelected official being in the driver's seat of the investigations. But I do agree that we need to take a look at our efficiency or inefficiencies and make necessary changes.
How often have we walked into some government office some government agency and looked around and asked ourselves, is this the most efficient way of dealing? How many times have we waited in lines and said, well, there are people sitting in all these desks. Why aren't they coming forward to help others? So I think re-examining, bureaucracy is a healthy thing. How we, solve the problem, there we can have severe disagreement. But I think people, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I think people have every right to expect the government to be efficient. I don't think we should have this, recognition. Well, the government is going to be top heavy. We're going to have people who shouldn't be there. No, that's not the expectation, because we pay taxes and we want to see people doing the right things with boundaries, not where we don't have boundaries.
Yeah, I agree 100%. But look, I've said this, I think, before, but the decision to change things takes place in a moment, right?
Mhm. Right.
But the actual change takes time. If you've got an ocean liner, you're going to turn that thing around. You decide to do that in a moment, but it takes 5 miles to turn that thing around because of how big it is. And if you turn it too fast, it can capsize. And what is true of ocean liners is true of government. So we have to be careful how quickly we try to make changes when we find areas of inefficiency.
You see, I wish some spokesperson, some leader would make that kind of statement, saying, look, this is a necessity for us. We want to do it in a way we're not coming with a rolling ball. We're coming, with an instrument that analyzes and says, how can we be more efficient? So people don't feel there's this kind of reckless treatment of those who have served in government, and many who have been very efficient. Not every government official is inefficient. So I think you need the commentary to go with the decision. And we need to hear that. People would be, I think, reassured that we're doing this in a most responsible fashion.
Yeah, and they'll be more supportive when it makes sense, when it's reasonable. I like the way you use the word rolling ball. I thought you were going to say wrecking ball.
Wrecking ball, rolling ball. They both do the same thing. You can roll a ball that knocks down. But it's going the way we were is going the wrong way. Mm-hmm. Going the way we're going may require some guardrails. And I think that's what we're suggesting. Do it in a way that people have confidence in the approach. So it's not just, this all or nothing that some people think we're seeing. But I like the fact that, it's same old doesn't work anymore. That's healthy.
Yeah, and look, cultures, especially corporate cultures, governmental cultures, which are made up of beliefs, traditions, ideas, emotional and intellectual dispositions that are institutionalized over time. We let them create policy and practices that were good 30, 40 years ago, but don't really work today. Yeah. And we have to say, well, wait a minute, things have changed, so we need to change, some of the systems and structures that are in place. I think it's important that we have these seasons. But American politics, Rabbi, tends to be pendular. It swings from one side to the other. I'd like to see it spend a little bit more time near the center. In fact, for me, a little right of center would be fine for me. Maybe not someone else politically and socially, but yeah, I'd like it to see it spend more time there.
I join you in that. And also, people are reluctant to accept change. We get used to a certain policy position, and we're married to it. And we think that's the only way to go. And when someone suggests a different path, oh, no, you can't do that because we've been doing this for years. I remember many years ago when I first became a rabbi. So I was with a synagogue, and women could not be members, official members. They could participate in different ways, but they couldn't be members. I looked at the directory. all men. And,
Mm-hmm.
I said, wait a minute, this isn't right. It's something very unfair. What do you mean it's unfair? It's the way women are doing things. And gradually I was able to move them in a more pluralistic place. And then later on they said, that was a great thing we did. And as long as they said we, it was quite all right. It was okay with me. I don't care who gets the credit. So I always find there are certain changes people are resistant, especially if parents are making those suggestions to kids or kids to parents. It's hard to accept, but when we can step back, it's not a bad thing.
You brought up a good point. So let me tap into. You went to law school. Actually,
I was a star at law school.
Was it Brooklyn Law or St. John's? I'm trying to remember.
No, I went to Brooklyn Law,
and I let you in.
And I just, and I just want to say this with all. I love Brooklyn Law School. It was a great moment for me because I went to law school for the pure reason of learning. I didn't intend to practice. I just wanted to learn, and the synagogue was filled with lawyers and judges, so it was my way of leveling the playing field. It wasn't easy, but it was the best thing I did because when you can go to school just to learn for the sake of learning, that's a remarkable moment.
Well, and it prepares you on how to think. We don't teach in our school systems critical thinking the way we should and need to. And why I even brought that up is because, let's tap into your Latin, status quo. It means the existing state of affairs in a society and institutional situations. And, the current norms, power structures, and social and political and economic conditions. And people push back against change. There are those, of course, Rabbi, whose whole idea is to maintain the status quo. And it's important. It's important because tradition and stability is critical to a society, right?
Right. So
we want that.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's give equal time to religion. Now that we've touched on the secular world. Moses, let's go Abraham, Moses, Jesus, they were iconoclasts, weren't they? I mean, didn't they say the status quo is not good enough?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're admired leaders, of course. And they met resistance because it becomes very comfortable.
People get comfortable in the status quo, and especially those in power, those who are benefiting, want to keep things as they are. They don't want change. And what happens over time with the population, Rabbi? Many people fall into a place where they become complacent. There's inertia. They accept the status quo because it's easier than pushing for change. And some people fear conflict and uncertainty. So they just sit back and say, it is what it is. And that's just the way things are. So we need those who protect the status quo, protect tradition, but we also need those who challenge the system. And that's why when I looked at the president's speech and I looked at Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other side, the reality is we need a strong two-party system. It's dangerous if we have one party continually dominating. We need Democrats to be just as strong in terms of what they're thinking and what they bring to the table, and we need Republicans to be just as strong in terms of what they bring to the table. So I'm very concerned about the look that I observed on the faces of Democrats as they sat there for 2 hours.
You know what I thought to myself? We'll be in a synagogue or church, and we'll be giving a sermon, and suddenly they'll be holding up those paddles. I disagree. That's not true.
Can you imagine?
They're going to protest that way. But I do think we need responsible responses. And I think that's what's lacking. You want to respond in a responsible way. Don't sit there when there's a young cancer survivor, who heroically steps, forward, or someone who's just been admitted to the Secret Service or whatever. Just to to boycott that way, you think you look better? You don't look better. You don't look. That's not leadership. That's not leadership.
Yeah.
And they taunt each other. That's wrong. That's not what I don't think people voted them in to do that. I think they want to see them lead. They want to see them battle it out intellectually, but not not the way that was presented.
And that's how we challenge the status quo. We have to first recognize that there are flaws in the existing system, and then consider how do we identify those flaws, those areas of deficiency, inefficiency rather, and effect change and remain conscious of how that change is going to impact the existing state of affairs. We have to think it through carefully. But we need movements and protests and policy changes and all of those things.
One quick thing before we conclude, because Ava Anderson, our producer, is signaling.
You
and I remember Congressman Ed Towns.
Oh, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I remember he said, I think I mentioned to you once, he said when he first became a congressman, he said he resented that seniority system. These people continue to be in power. They don't leave. He said, but as I get older, I realize it's a brilliant system. It's brilliant. But you need both. You need those who are older and younger and people, and to battle it out each other intellectually, not amateurishly.
Yeah, and even in our faith context, synagogues, houses of worship, churches, they have to be intergenerational.
Yeah.
I've seen too often that, congregations age out because they're not connecting generationally.
Right.
And that's very, very important that we do that. Yeah.
All right.
Great conversation, Rabbi. Always a pleasure to be with you here on a Sunday morning. And of course, we are nationally syndicated Rev and the Rabbi show. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us and spreading the word about this incredible program. Till next time, right here on Red Apple Audio Networks.